Welcome to another episode of On the Musical Road to Emmaus. This is your host, Carol Traupman-Carr. I am recording today's episode in the midst of winter, some of the darkest days of the year, and one of the longest cold stretches that I can remember in my lifetime here in eastern Pennsylvania. And so I think that opening clip to my podcast that I use, the choir and congregation singing at church, Christ be our light, shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness, is so appropriate in a period like this. Christ is always our light in any kind of darkness, not just the dark of winter. And I'm going to get to that today in a conversation with a colleague at Moravian University, Dr. Mark Koscinski, who is also a deacon in the Polish Catholic Church.
Right.
And so Mark and I work with our Catholic students on campus. And I'm, of course, from the Roman Catholic Church, and so I've been learning a lot from Mark about these different Catholic churches and the places where we come together and where we separate. But Mark, could you just tell me a little bit of your background? Because I first came to know you as someone who's teaching in our accounting and management programs, but then discovered this other side of you.
I jokingly refer to myself as being left and right brained. That one side of me deals with the hard business, quantitative world, and the other part of me deals with the religious world and the philosophical world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it makes me a better professor, and definitely I think a better person along the way as well. So.
Tell me and tell our listeners, what's your elevator speech for the differences between the Roman Catholic Church and the Polish Catholic Church?
Okay. One has to do with the authority of the Pope. That is, the Polish National Church is part of independent Catholicism as it's defined. It has valid sacraments, valid apostolic succession, and Roman Catholics can come to receive sacraments at the Polish National Catholic Church and vice versa. Mm-hmm. Because the Polish National Catholic Church stands in relation to the Roman Catholic Church the same way that Orthodox churches do. Orthodox churches have valid apostolic succession and a valid priesthood. Mm-hmm. So you often see, for instance, Polish National Catholic priests sharing chaplaincies at hospitals with Roman Catholic priests. So there's a lot of cooperation between the two. And if you think about it from the perspective of the person in the pew, the connection to the papacy sometimes is actually kind of tenuous. Right? You pray, you're connected to your parish priest. You might have some connection to your bishop. But I think the typical Roman Catholic has very little connection to the Vatican.
We have a very emotional connection to the Vatican, and we have, of course, a great deal of interest in what's going on there.
Of course.
In the conclave was our Olympics, waiting to see, except that we couldn't watch it on NBC. We were waiting to see how that would turn out.
Absolutely.
What drew you into diaconate?
Wanting to give back. I come to academia the long way around, Carol. I was in the business world for a long time. I started out in public accounting, some large public accounting firms. I moved into the business world. I became chief financial officer of some large public companies. And I reached a point in my career when I decided I really had to think about what I wanted to do when I grow up. So I came to the conclusion that it really is time to start giving back. And that's how I ended up working at a college. I think I'm giving back here, and I think I'm giving back at church as well. So it is a motivation, I think, to serve and to help, which I think is a classic definition of the diaconate.
And I would say I have come to know you in the last 2 years far more as someone outside the classroom than I have inside because of our work with the Catholic students on campus.
Sure.
And I appreciate your partnership there. I mentioned to you when I contacted you about this that the gospel reading on Sunday, fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time Cycle A, is from the Sermon on the Mount, otherwise known as the Beatitudes, and it's my favorite gospel passage. And I've already done a podcast on this earlier, back in, I think, August or September of 2025. I jump on, whenever I see the Beatitudes or anything that even implies the Beatitudes, I jump on it. There's a lot of great music
Oh,
written
sure.
about the Beatitudes. But I wanted to talk to someone for more sort of theological and liturgical purposes. When you hear the Beatitudes, I'm curious, like, what's the first word, image, or feeling that comes to mind for you?
I think it depends on which version of the Beatitudes you're looking at. If you're looking at Matthew 5, you have the image of Moses on the mountain, Jesus on the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very authoritative. If I remember correctly, it says Jesus went up to the mountain, he sat and opened his mouth. That is a statement of he's speaking sort of ex cathedra, as right. He's speaking
Right.
with authority. In any Catholic church, the position of authority is sitting.
Right.
So he's sitting, he's speaking authoritatively. There's 9 Beatitudes, and if you say, rejoice and be glad, that's 10. It's like 10 commandments, another allusion to Moses. So it's one of power and command. This is how you should live your life.
And I do think that it is from Matthew this Sunday.
Right.
And you are correct. I just opened up my Great Adventure Catholic Bible, and I can verify that. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. And when we think about being seated as a position of power, he is seated at the right hand of the Father, and so that gives him a very privileged, powerful position.
In the ancient world, being seated was, for instance, when Pontius Pilate sentenced Jesus, he was sitting. When bishops perform sacraments, confirmation, for instance, most of the time they're sitting. So bishops imitate sort of the ancient tradition, and when it says he opened his mouth, he's speaking. This is not a debate. This is Jesus speaking with great power. If you look at Luke 6, it says it's the Sermon on the Plain, and scholars debate whether that was one and the same event. But there it says Jesus came down from the mountain onto the plain, so he's speaking to being accessible. He's speaking to people as if he were one of them, so to speak. And it's kind of interesting because, if I remember correctly, there's 4 or 5 blesseds, and then there's 4 or 5 woes that come after it.
Yes. Poor, those who hunger, those who weep, and when men hate you and exclude you and revile you, and you are correct. And then it goes, woe to you that are rich, woe that are full now, woe that laugh now.
Right.
Woe to you when all men speak well of you.
And I think Matthew is the more popular version of this. And if you look after the Beatitudes, Jesus continues this connection to Moses, because then he starts speaking about selected commandments as well. So that is I think the more popular of the 2 versions. So the question is, was it 1 or 2 events? Scholars are debating about that. I could go either way on that.
I could see how he would use at least part of this sermon, this teaching, more than once in order to reinforce it. I will admit I had not realized that there were the 2 versions, but I had definitely, as soon as you started talking, I was like, oh yeah, I remember the woe part. It's the Matthew version that we have this Sunday, and it's the Matthew version that I used at my wedding, and it's the Matthew version that I have planned for my funeral. I spent some time during COVID thinking about not my own death, but trying to prepare a liturgy of my funeral so that my family doesn't have to worry about that.
Right.
And it is very popular at funerals. I've heard it a lot.
Sure.
Matthew, chapter 5, you've explained the differences. So what is that first image then for you out of that version?
Authority. That is, this is the way you should live your life. This is the way that you should conduct yourself. And if you go into the Eastern tradition, that version of the Beatitudes is recited as part of noon prayer every day.
Oh, really?
In the liturgical office of the Eastern Church. So it's monks are reminded every day, or people doing their office every day are reminded of this. Then it's also used as a processional during Lent. It's sung during Lent as a reminder of this is what your life should be. So, to me, that's the most familiar, the more extensive, the fuller treatment, I think, of the Beatitudes. People will say, scholars will say, it probably was was probably not even said by Jesus. Scholarly consensus is you would have these big revival meetings. So this was scribes stitching together things that Jesus said in the course of these large revival meetings. Think about the feeding of the 5,000.
Yes.
Long events. So
yes,
there was
the loaves and the fishes.
They think probably not one speech. I don't know about that. I also think, as you just mentioned, if you are an itinerant preacher going from place to place, you are reusing some of your content.
Yeah.
So there could have been 2 events.
Yeah.
There could have been one on the mountain and one on
Yeah.
the plain.
Yeah.
But scholars seem to shy away from that because of the Greek. The Greek is similar in both. So it seems as if that Matthew and Luke were using a similar source, and then just arranging it for particular audiences.
And Luke, as I understand it, was not one of the original 12, but a lot of what he wrote, he heard from people afterwards and constructed that gospel, as opposed to Matthew, who was one of the 12.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's more authoritative or more authentic, but it's maybe a little bit less of whisper down the alley.
Correct. And there's also, Matthew was also aimed for a Jewish audience as well too. So if you're writing this to a Jewish audience, you would assume that they would be familiar with Moses, and assume going up on the mountain would be sort of a position of power as well.
What audience then was Luke for?
Gentiles, more common people.
Okay.
Right? So as the church was expanding out, scholarly consensus is Luke is a little bit later, as the gospel is beginning to spread throughout the Middle East. The idea is it's spreading beyond the Jews in Palestine and spreading towards the Gentile church. So the idea is that Luke tried to make it a little bit more accessible. Luke is thought to have been, or pretty much consensus is Luke traveled with Paul.
Okay.
So Luke was one of the apostles to the Gentiles. So if that is the case, you definitely can see how Luke would tailor it to...
Yeah. But then he's also not that far removed.
Correct.
He's like, when you think about 6 degrees of separation, he's only 2 degrees.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
So I think I love the Beatitudes. I mean, it's beautiful poetry along with everything else, but I think there are places there where also I look at it and I'm like, I wonder what this means. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. That's the very first one. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I've always wondered about that one. I'm like, if we're talking about spiritual lives, shouldn't we try to be stronger in our spirit, rich in our spirit, not poor in our spirit? What do you say about that phrase?
I think you have to go back and look at the Greek, because poor in spirit is the best translation that you get.
Okay.
The thinking is that it reflects some degree of humility rather than arrogance. So it reflects a demeanor more than a spiritual life. We read it today, poor in spirit, and it seems oxymoronic in a certain sense, but that's not the original intent of the writers. They were struggling with it as you're moving into the English.
If he's saying this, he's along the Sea of Galilee, what it says before the end of chapter 4 before we get here. But I know as he entered into Jerusalem, a lot of what he was doing was pretty strong accusations against the Sanhedrin for what he saw as, I think, their lack of humility. So what I'm hearing from you is he may have been preaching in some ways to them.
Correct.
And to others who are following what they were doing and saying.
That's correct. The big question about the Beatitudes is this the formula for justification and salvation, or is this hyperbolic? In other words, if you continue reading, it says you have to be perfect, like the Father, and we as human beings can't be perfect.
We can't be perfect.
We can strive to be perfect, and there are certain strains of Christianity, again, particularly in the Eastern Church, where the requirement is that you do the best you can. Here's perfection, strive for perfection. And I think you see that, Carol, when you are looking at the Protestant Reformation, where Martin Luther struggles with this idea of justification, right? How am I going to be justified? How can I possibly be perfect when I'm coming from Adam in a sinful past? So there's questions about what does this mean. I'm a believer in here is the ideal, we work to that ideal, right? And again, in Eastern Church, you repeat it a lot as a reminder every day that this is what you should be striving for. So it's a constant reinforcement. It's held up as the standard for us. Sometimes we don't achieve the standard, and as you know, every day we get up, we pick up our cross, and we go. And that's what it means to be Catholic. Again, if you're a Lutheran or from the Reformed tradition, you may not necessarily agree with that.
I started a course recently in Ignatian exercises. Something that you said there just resonates with me. We read a poem/prayer by Thomas Merton, and where he says, "But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope I have the desire in all that I am doing." And so part of what he's saying is, we need to try to do everything right. We need to try to be perfect. But you, God, knowing that we want to do this, that we are genuinely trying, might not be enough, but it's a darn good start, I think.
Correct.
So don't just want to do it, but I think the desire to do it is maybe part of what aligns with this.
Correct. So how do we achieve it? Well, through grace, through the sacraments. And again, our brethren from the Protestant churches wouldn't necessarily agree with that, right? Because they would look at that as works, and it's not justification by faith. I'm from the former position. I believe that we have to work towards our salvation as a Catholic.
Yeah, I mean that's why we celebrate the resurrection every single Sunday as a reminder of that. Is there a part of the Beatitudes? I think it's hyperbole in some ways. There's definitely metaphor in here. I think some people would hear, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." We have a lot of parts of the world and moments where things are not so righteous, and we might be satisfied in a moment, but overall, that feels unachievable very often. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Are there parts of this that, when we look at all of them, and you're right, there are 9 there, are there parts that you think are particularly difficult in today's world?
Oh, I think almost all of them are difficult in today's world, that we have to strive to achieve all of them. But I think the one that I'm most particularly attracted to is the 10th. Rejoice and be glad, if you count. We always have to keep reminding ourselves that we are, as Christians, as Catholics, we are people of faith. We are people of hope. My ordination card was the line from Philippians, the quote from Philippians, where Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Again, I say rejoice. Similar echoes here. Rejoice, you have your faith. Here are your guidelines. Happily work towards the kingdom of heaven. So I think the 10th line sums up everything. This is what you have to strive for. This is what you have to work for. And I hold that out as hope, right? I grasp to that clause and say, this is in fact hope. This is Christian hope for us. And that's what we have to live towards.
I want to take it into the next 2 verses, actually, as I turn the page here.
Sure.
Verse 13 is, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trodden underfoot by men," which is actually completely appropriate with all the winter weather we've been having. We're throwing a lot of salt out there. But then this next one, "You are the light of the world." Christ has been saying, as we go through the Gospels, he has been saying to his disciples, "I am the light." And then I was just thinking, well, now you are the light of the world. Can you talk me through, help me to understand how we get there from Christ, "I am the light, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life," all of those things, and now you are the light of the world?
One explanation I've heard for that is, you think of the sun and the moon. The moon has a reflection. It is a light as well. Jesus is the light, but his work is manifest through us, through his followers. Particularly through the apostles as the first bishops. So they shine in a reflected light from him as well. So we instinctively look towards the light. You think about the structure of Christian prayer, for instance, right? The old form of Vespers was done in the dark, right? And there was a part of Vespers where you would light the candles, or and the old Christian prayer called "O Joyful Light." So there's a constant reflection. So you were in the dark and you were praying by reflected light, hoping for the morning. And in certain parts of Europe, you're hoping the Vikings didn't come at night, to kind of take you away. But you would pray to get through the dark, the reflected light, and then in the morning, you would see, the light of the resurrection, right? The New Testament. So I tend to think it's that, but there could be other explanations. But that's the one that I've always thought best described that.
Oh, thank you. If Jesus were walking this earth today, and we don't know that he's not actually, but if he were, we're in Bethlehem. We're in Lehigh Valley right now, Pennsylvania. If Jesus were walking around here, and he was going to do the Sermon on the Mount, where do you imagine him sort of setting up for that?
Interesting. For the maximum exposure, I would say where the Super Bowl is, up in the booth for the Super Bowl.
Wherever that happens to be in any given year, yes.
Speaking from authority on top of the...
He could be the halftime show.
It could be the halftime show, and hundreds of millions of people are tuning in, so that might be the equivalent of being on top of the mountain and speaking from authority.
Yeah.
If you wanted to take the Lucan approach and speak to the common people, I think probably at a sort of a rally, a college football game where you're on the same floor as everyone else, maybe with a megaphone. Or
Do you? We're in a. I think about that when you mentioned him with the loaves and fishes and speaking to the masses, and they say like 5,000 people, not counting women and children, so it was even more. I don't even know how they all heard him.
There's one theory that, for instance, the Sermon on a Plain is if you are by the shore and you're standing level and the people were on a hill, there'd be a natural megaphone effect.
Right.
But I don't know if that's true or not. But you're absolutely right. How could people listen to these speeches? It was a well accepted literary style in the ancient world of constructing speeches for people. So it could be that they heard snippets and then constructed a speech.
Or he wandered around and they heard bits and pieces
of it, and they constructed it later. I mean, I think if you look at the historian Eusebius, he says Mark wrote down the sayings of Peter, but not in the order that they occurred. So,
then again, he was God as well as man at the time, and it's possible that he didn't have to project any more than I am right now, and people, no matter how far away, heard it in their heads.
That's correct.
Because he's God.
Correct.
I'm thinking that when we think about how we measure success and power in particular, and happiness too to some degree, but I think power and success right now in this place where we are in 2026, they would seem to be the anti-Beatitudes.
Correct. Correct.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how we can reconcile those two, because it feels to me like a lot of the power and wealth becomes very singular, rather than speaking to the common folks and inviting them in and helping them to achieve. Now, I will say, Jesus didn't have to deal with social media.
Correct.
And it would have been it would be interesting to imagine a world in where Christ is walking on this planet, and people are tweeting what he has to say, and how many followers would he have on his Facebook or Instagram page. But so there's that aspect that changes how we get the news and how the news is socialized to us. I'm wondering, can the Beatitudes, in a day and an age where we are measured by our titles and by our wealth and by the stock market and by how we treat people, and not always how we treat people well, how can the Beatitudes help us in today's world?
I think they put perspective on what we do. You think about, there are still people entering the Catholic priesthood, right? And the three traditional vows are poverty, chastity, and obedience. And how do you get to men? Power, money, sex. So it's a traditional denial of things that attract men. So there is a that's one way of doing it. The Beatitudes remind us that we have to keep things in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And if you become a Catholic priest, you really have to keep things in perspective because you are denying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you're joining an order. I think it's almost, Carol, I think it's the Aristotelian virtue ethic, right? The golden mean.
Mm.
You know, Jesus didn't condemn money. Jesus condemned the love of money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when he drove the money changers out of the temple,
Yes.
he didn't condemn the use of money.
Mm-hmm. Just said not in this place.
Correct. He had one of his apostles kept the purse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a matter of perspective.
Mm.
You know, as Jesus said, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light."
Mm-hmm.
I think that he would have an allowance for that, but I don't think if you are conducting your life solely for profit and money, I don't think he would prove that at all.
You have any final thoughts you want to share?
Kind of a silly one. You know, beatitude means beloved of God or favorite of God.
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Orthodox patriarchs, the head of their church, their title is Your Beatitude. Just like cardinals would say Your Eminence, or
Yes.
we would say for a bishop, Your Excellency.
Yeah.
So if you are the head of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, or you are the head of the Romanian Catholic Church, your title is Your Beatitude. And I think favorite of God is a little bit of Catholic trivia to end our discussion.
Thank you very much. I did not know that, but now that will stick with me, I can guarantee you. Well, thank you, Mark, so much.
Pleasure's all mine, Carol. Thank you for having me.
Oh, sure. Always a pleasure to speak to you. And so here ends my conversation with my colleague, Mark Koscinski. Mark, thanks for joining us on an episode of On the Musical Road to Emmaus. And this Sunday, we will close with a hymn that reminds us of the Beatitudes, that draws on the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, longing for their Lord, for God's coming kingdom shall be theirs. Lead me, Lord, by the light of truth, to seek and to find the narrow way. May you be safe and healthy and warm in this cold season, this chill of the winter, embraced by the love of God. This is Carol Traupman-Carr signing off for another episode of On the Musical Road to Emmaus. God bless.